Mr. Minnick here with another video, Attrition in Warfare and Surrender. We are coming to a close to our Civil War units. Let's look at our big question and answer. How did attrition warfare bring the war to an end? Grant's continual pursuit of Lee, despite heavy losses, depleted the Confederate army of men. Very important here. We have to understand, everyone, that Grant was all about total war, right? This idea of leave nothing to invite the enemy to return. Destroy whatever cannot be consumed. Let the valley be left so that crows flying over it will have to carry their rations along with them. Remember this in our previous video, Grant told his generals, basically destroy the southern countryside so that they can't utilize it for supplies. He's going to take this a step further in another discussion with John Hill Brinton and say that the art of war is simple enough. Find out where your enemy is, get at him as soon as you can, strike him as hard as you can, and keep moving on. And he's talking about attrition war. And what is that? Well, how is this going to tie into the total war? Well, it's a military strategy which one side attempts to win a war by wearing down its enemy to the point of collapse through continuous losses in personnel and material. The Union is very much focused on the material side of things. Now it's going to try and destroy the personnel, the Confederate Army. The war will usually be won by the side with a greater number of resources. Think about it this way, guys. The Union has majority of the manufacturing and supplies, as we saw at the beginning of this unit, and also has majority of the population that it can use to replenish its armies. So, of course, Lincoln's all in favor of this because he says about Grant, he's like, I can't spare this man, he fights. And some individuals felt that Grant was a brutal drunk and that he wasn't well equipped for this conflict. Lincoln liked what he did. He thought he'd bring the war to a close. And he's going to be right. So what do we get here in Grant's Virginia campaign of 1864 and 1865 are a series of very brutal fights starting at the Battle of Wilderness. And what I want to show you guys are the casualty amounts of these battles that will take place during this Virginia campaign. What we have is the Battle of the Wilderness. 18,400 for the Union side, 11,400 for the Confederates. When it comes to casualties, this doesn't mean just men dead. This also talks about men wounded as well. But still, if you're wounded, you still can't fight. So we go further. Spotsylvania Courthouse, another brutal battle. 8,000 for the Union side, 12,000 for the Confederacy. And as we move down these battles, you're going to notice that the Confederacy has less losses than the Union by 22,000. And it seems odd then, well, if you look to your map here, and we start at the Wilderness, and we move all the way down to Cold Harbor and Petersburg, the Confederacy is constantly retreating despite losing more men. Well, why is that? Let's take a look here. Percentage of army lost. When you compare Grant's army to Lee's army, Grant only lost 45% of his army, which can easily be replenished by the amount of people that live in the North. The Confederacy does not have the men or the population to replenish 59% of Lee's forces that he lost. That's going to be very detrimental for the South. What do we get here is Lee is going to have to abandon Richmond, the capital. Why? Well, it's because he can't defend it. He doesn't have the numbers to defend it. So after our battles of Wilderness, Spotsylvania, and Cold Harbor, Lee will have to give up Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy, which we thought, well, Mr. Minnick, if you lost your capital, that meant you lost the war, but Lee's still not giving up. The Confederacy will still keep fighting. And the reason why I want to talk about this is what we get as a result of this is still some of the most vicious combat that is taking place in the Civil War. Almost a prelude to the type of fighting that takes place in World War I. Very brutal stuff. And it's a testament to why were those casualty amounts so high? 18,000, 11,000. These are all people with families and so forth. And this is kind of why. After the abandonment of Richmond, Confederate forces are going to pull back into this city by the name of Petersburg. And the Battle of Petersburg is incredibly vicious. It will result in a Union victory, but there will also be a lot of losses. And the reason why I want to show this to you guys is to reinforce the sort of intensity of combat, of why so many lives were lost, and ultimately why the Confederacy can't replenish its forces. What's going to happen in the Siege of Petersburg is that the Confederates have dug themselves into this city. The Union sappers, or mine detonators, if you will, are going to blow up this massive amount of dynamite that will create this huge crater right before the city of Petersburg. The Union soldiers are going to run headfirst at this explosion, thinking they softened up the Confederate defenses. They ultimately just run themselves into this crater, which leads to a turkey shoot for the Confederacy. The Confederates are able to open fire on the Union soldiers, leading to a huge amount of casualties for the Union that can be replenished. The Union will be able to flank around this massive crater and get the Confederates by surprise and push them out of Petersburg and eventually take the city.
Turkey shoot! They've run themselves into a hole! Hell, busted!
After abandoning Richmond and being unable to replenish his forces, both sides suffering high amounts of casualties as we saw, the Union can reinforce itself unlike the Confederacy, meaning by April 9th of 1865, Robert E. Lee will have to surrender at Appomattox Courthouse, thus putting an end to the American Civil War. So what do we remember? Well, how did attrition warfare bring the war to an end? Grant's continual pursuit of Lee, despite heavy losses, depleted the Confederate army of men. They couldn't replenish themselves, and Grant's whole goal was, let's go out and fight them as much as possible. Keep engaging them in battles, because if I just fight, and even if I lose a battle, Lee will have no way to reinforce his armies, which ultimately leads to a Union victory in the American Civil War. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.